Hi there, Gula Tech VC bot here. The good folks at Scythe ran Unicon 2025 in April this year and invited Ron Gula to give the opening keynote. We are hosting a copy of the keynote on our Gula Tech YouTube channel. Ron spoke about why AI is changing cyber faster than we can react, how to professionalize cybersecurity like law or medicine, the real value of cyber offense, and a behind-the-scenes insight into investing in companies like Scythe and why some vendors make it while others miss the mark. Enjoy the keynote, and I encourage everyone to check out the full list of great speakers and the Unicon 2025 conference at scythe.io/unicon-2025.
Good morning,
everybody. Happy Unicorn Day. Welcome to Unicon. How's it going?
Every day is a holiday.
Great. All right. Great to see you, Bryce. And thanks again for asking me to keynote here. Look, you guys got a lot of great speakers. I'm going to make a bunch of comments here on, not surprisingly, AI, the state of cyber, how we can professionalize cyber. I'm going to touch on even some cyber offense stuff. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm talking to you now today as a cyber investor, but I started out as a pen tester for the NSA. I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and just see cybersecurity kind of unfold over the past 30 years. So today what I do is I run Gula Tech Adventures. We are investors in companies like Scythe I'm trying to represent today. But we've put a lot of our own money to work in a wide variety of vendor startups out there, but also tried to do the same thing for nonprofits out there. We've got the Gula Tech Foundation. We just did a soft launch of our own cyber clinic, the Cyber Ready Clinic. And we also tried to spend a lot of time with the politicians, executives at boards, and just even reaching people on Zooms and barnyards and conferences like Unicon, and trying to do things like on YouTube where we try to educate cyber to non-cyber people. So what I'm talking to you today about is kind of what I've seen over the past 30 years. And if I said to you, what have been the biggest improvements in cybersecurity? What were the breakthrough things that we've had in cybersecurity over the past 30 years? It's kind of a struggle to kind of point at something without falling into a sort of a vendor pitch or something, right? Is it sandboxing, right? Was sandboxing a leapfrog over antivirus? Is it EDR? Is it the use of anomalies and log storage in the cloud? Maybe the cloud is the biggest advancement. The idea that we can have, elastic and ephemeral things in the cloud that are hard to attack. Maybe that's the best thing that we've done. But as an industry, we really aren't pointing to things that has captured the general public. If you look at other areas that the public's aware of, healthcare, for example, right? We've had dramatic improvements in cancer treatment, dramatic improvements in weight loss. If you look at artificial intelligence in the entertainment space, right? We've got animation. If you've ever seen any of my videos, I am not a professional animator, and I'm doing stuff these days that just subpar below what you can do at Pixar. So the question is, where have those improvements been in cybersecurity? Now, it's a little unfair for me to say that because we've had this relativistic view. It's almost like the quantum, what's your frame of reference? The attackers have gotten better every year. So every year that you had 5% improvement in threat intelligence or 5% improvement in patch rates, whatever it is, we've also seen an increase in the threats and those attacking us. And we've also been putting more and more things on the plate that we have to defend. So it's very difficult as an industry to kind of either be congratulatory or critical of where we're at because it's been moving so fast. But having talking about AI, where is AI in cyber today? And it's hard for me as an investor to really say that we've got really good AI in cybersecurity. Now, we know it's coming, but almost everybody that I've seen pitching a cyber startup that's using AI, 99% of them have an API called OpenAI, and it's a feature in a tool. There's nothing really wrong with that. It makes the better user experience. It's an incremental evolution of whatever cybersecurity tool you might be in, but it's not transformative, right? In animation, I can literally have a character here and have somebody over here and say, I need this guy to walk over and pick up a beer and say a funny line. I have yet to see a company pitch me or a technology pitch me where they understand all the bureaucracies, the people, the technologies, and the risk of your organization, and can walk you over to being CMMC compliant, PCI compliant, that sort of thing. Now, there's stuff like that out there, but it's not captured the market the same way we've done it. At best, what we've done with artificial intelligence is make our level 1 analysts a little bit better, a level 2 analyst, level 3 analyst, that sort of thing. We've done better ways to analyze data, right? But these are all very, very minor efficiency features and not some sort of strategic advantage we have over the aggressors out there. Now, why is that? Look, for a long time, I mean, when I was the CEO of Tenable, I had a lot of companies come over the last 20 years or so and say, hey, look, I can take all that vulnerability data at Tenable, which could be vulnerabilities, could be config, can be assets, the whole basically picture of what's out there. And we're going to try to map these to the controls and prevent attacks. Now, I've been pitched this probably, 100 times as companies, as projects. And the problem is this: all those other examples I used about AI and animation or, advances in healthcare, there's very, very discrete data out there. But when it comes to AI and cyber, we don't have a whole lot of standards when it comes to how do we measure things and how do we do comparative stuff. No two networks are alike. No two configurations are alike. I've seen a lot of issues with that. And what happens is these projects go off, and there's been many of these projects where we try to find, what is the killer control to mitigate something. And they all kind of fail because every network is a little bit different. And this is one of the reasons we're not seeing great progress beyond conversational questions about cybersecurity with the AI vendors. There's no real good measurement for doing that. And I've spoken to a lot of MSSPs, obviously still talk to the Tenable folks. I've talked to the Qualys folks, Rapid7 folks, people who are gathering all this data. They want to do these kind of things, but it's still not at the level that we can do as an industry to really point to, what are the 4 things you need to do that are very, 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 very specific. So I'm a little concerned about that. There's also this question of like, how reliable is this stuff? Now, I'm going to pick on one of my companies here for a second, Automox, right? They integrated OpenAI, where you can dramatically write a script, with ChatGPT and, do a PowerShell config, that sort of thing. And that's a great feature. But are you going to run that PowerShell script on a Friday before you go home from work? Are you going to run it on Monday morning? What are you going to do? So as much as AI makes things easier, it doesn't solve these problems of how do we manage our systems and what's going on out there. Now, it's not all sort of bad news, right? A lot of people are predicting that there's going to be these major attacks from artificial intelligence. We really haven't seen that. We haven't seen any new TTPs. We haven't seen any brand new, CVEs that are out there now. Are people using AI to do reverse engineering of stuff? Absolutely, it's a great. Are people using AI to use this? That's great. Has it been the end of the world though? We haven't really seen that. And if you're in the business of fighting botnets, trying to hack, understand what the C2 networks are and stuff, we really aren't seeing nodes out there that are being driven with AI. Now, maybe there's an AI master control somewhere else, but in the field, we're not seeing a lot of that. AI still takes a lot of CPU to run, right? So if someone's going to knock over a box and try to run an LLM on it, right, they need a GPU farm, that sort of thing. We're just not seeing those kind of attacks just yet. They're very noisy. And, time on those GPUs is something you have to pay for. It's the kind of thing that's coming out there, that sort of thing. And again, if you look back at the NIST Cybersecurity Framework or the Center for Internet Security, their guidance for how to secure a network, it hasn't changed in the face of AI. There's been no really new sort of, if you think of this as a chess game, the actual moves you can make are still the same kind of moves that were there before. Nobody's come up with an interdimension way to tunnel a night across the board or anything like that. So we just haven't seen that kind of stuff. Now, we are seeing some attacks where people are faking people. We're trying to do human attacks. I can spoof a voice, I can spoof a video, I can do those kind of things. We haven't seen a major attack where somebody has compromised an enterprise, gotten into like single sign-on, pretended to be like, Ron Gula at Gula Tech Adventures, and then really done a fake Zoom and that sort of stuff. That's coming. It's not there yet. There have been some banks where people have been victim to those kind of things, but we haven't seen those things yet. It's coming, but it's not there. Now, as cyber people, though, we'd be fools to ignore this AI stuff. So look, what should we be doing as professional cyber people? So one of the first things we should be doing is whatever organization we should be at the center of leading our AI governance for our organization. What does that mean? If you look at AI governance as a superset of all IT governance, what is all the tech that we are using? And does that tech have the ability to take data from us and retrain, that sort of thing? So if you're introducing SaaS applications, software applications, AI applications in your organization, are you doing it in a way that's compliant? Are you doing it in a way that's protecting the data of your company? The complexities of trying to figure out, does a certain product and vendor using an AI a certain way, does it align with your security policy? Does it align with the protection of your intellectual property? This is a very difficult thing to do. You got to be part lawyer, part technologist, and part just understanding, when these things happen. We should be at the center of those kind of discussions, and you're going to hear from some great speakers today on some of this. Neil is going to talk about this, I'm sure. But this concept of having this governance there is really important, because on one hand, the demand from the users for using AI is so high. But on the other hand, we know that cyber hygiene, and we're going to hear about CTEM and trying to be better at that, it's not a perfect solution. So one of the other things that we should be doing to kind of protect ourselves from this new world of AI threats, which is the vendors that use AI and also maybe potential attackers out there, is we're going to see an increase in demand for privacy. And when I say privacy, I'm talking about having networks and enclaves and basically data sets that are separated from the internet. If you think of the internet as having content that's radioactive, email, downloading stuff, Slack message, anything connected to the internet is something that can be used by an adversary or perhaps a vendor who's innocuously sharing data that you don't know about to possibly lose your data. And this type of separation, we all know the technology, right? There's zero trust networks out there, but there's also 5G. You can literally put all your computers that you want to have separate on a separate 5G network. You can use cryptography. You can use air gap. You don't have to go as far as the DoD does with their skips and with their separated air gap networks, but you need to have some sort of barrier between the radioactive content from the internet and then actually kind of what you're doing for your day job. Now, if you haven't looked at the regulations, if you haven't kept up with that, there's been a lot of stuff going on. Right now, obviously, we've got the Trump administration kind of pushing out a lot of different policies. We've got to stay up to that. When you hear about these trade wars and these tariffs, you're also seeing this administration push back on things like GDPR. Right now, GDPR says a lot of stuff about how you have to collect data and what you have to do it. And it can change on a moment when these things are negotiated. We don't really have any sort of federal guidelines to do data classification. But if you look at each state, every state has got little bits of different things that you have to do. What counts as PII in California might not count as PII in Texas. It's a lot to track and a lot to keep up with. I encourage everybody to kind of look at that. But the thing that I want to draw people's attention to is Rite Aid. Now, Rite Aid rolled out an AI monitoring system to do a theft detection. And, they're not experts in video AI analysis. And they basically had a lawsuit that basically said, look, you're profiling people, your AI was doing bad things and accusing people the wrong way. You're liable for that. The same thing can happen in cybersecurity. So as you're rolling these AI applications out to monitor your networks and perhaps enhance your SOC and stuff like that, you might be liable for things that you're not aware of. So this is a new world that we're running into, and it's definitely interesting. My last comment on this whole AI thing is look, I'd like to remind people to go back and watch Idiocracy. Now, Idiocracy is a movie where they talk about only stupid people breed, so there's more stupid people in the use, and that can be a very, very strange topic if you think about it. What I'm worried about with the AI tech is a lot of this stuff. If you replace a human, but that human never has the chance to learn. If the AI is not going to learn these new cyber attacks, we could freeze ourselves. Imagine you buy this great new AI, and you in effect have an AI from the 80s when it's the 2025. So you have to kind of keep in mind when you're adding this AI stuff in, how are they going to keep it modern? And this kind of gets to the whole enchilada when it comes to cyber professionalization. If you're in this industry and you're kind of grappling with what does it mean to be in cyberspace, you're kind of at the peak of your career, because we as an industry have not done a great job talking about what goals we have out there, right? Is our goal in cybersecurity to just mitigate China and Russia aggression in cyberspace? Is it to have a reliable and resilient, network? Is it to protect data? Is it to stop ransomware? We don't have anything like a Hippocratic oath that they have in the healthcare system, which basically says, you provide care, provide confidentiality, and don't do any harm. People have suggested that sort of thing for cybersecurity, and I've actually liked that so much. My wife kind of says we should call this industry the data care industry. There's a lot of benefits for calling it data care. It's easy to recruit people. You don't have this sort of militaristic, we're going to go hunt malware and things like that. And it's also a lot easier to recruit people who don't, just want to get into this industry, and they're not. We're more welcoming than looking at perhaps all the great professionals that are out there, which when we put them on a platter and basically kind of talk about the great things we've done, it's kind of almost like a barrier to entry, right? So data care really makes it a lot easier for somebody to enter this career field and not feel that they have to be a PhD expert, be able to talk about malware and policy and offensive cyber at the drop of a hat. I think one of the things I've been very, very happy about that we've done on our YouTube channel is we had this a fake game of Cyber Jeopardy, where we had a cyber, basically somebody who got certifications compete against somebody who got a college degree against an AI. And this was done on purpose, right? This is kind of the future. Who is going to be doing cybersecurity for us, right? Is it going to be a trade person who's actually going to be, competent in what they do? Is it going to be a cyber educated person who's perhaps college educated, or is it going to be an AI? It's probably going to be some combination of that. We don't know what that combination is, but as you think about professionalizing our industry, that's the kind of the tools that we're working. Now, a big thing about cyber professionalism is trust. And I'm going to bring up Signalgate. I think it's a lot of folks who are talking about the Signalgate, where we talked about the Signal group that was used to plan this attack on the Houthis at an unclassified level. Most people who are criticizing that or defending that they're showing their political colors. But to me, I think we missed an opportunity as cyber professionals saying, look, if you get invited to something that you're not supposed to have access to, you need to raise your hand and say, I'm not supposed to be here. This is a teaching moment. I've been invited to the wrong Zooms. I've been invited to the wrong Slacks. I've never been invited to an invasion planning meeting. But my point is like, as cyber professionals, this is a great teaching moment that we can use to the people that we're trying to be present. Because again, as cyber professionals, people outside of cyber can't see cyber, but they can see you. So anytime there's a chance for you to kind of make a teaching moment like that or something like along those lines, it's going to help the industry. It's going to help things move along. All right. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about the cyber professional thing, and it's going to seem like a plug for Scythe here, the whole CTEM, but the reality is this. Look, the reason we invested in Scythe is because we wanted a different way to know that you're secure. Now, this industry's matured a bit. We have CTEM, which we'll be hearing more about today. I'm sure a lot of folks know about this already. But it used to be, why do I know I'm secure? Well, in the 90s, it was, I got a pen test. I did a vulnerability scan. Right now, in the early 2000s, it was continuous monitoring. I could have my controls, validation testing, that sort of thing. But to me, if you're not actually doing an actual test of your infrastructure, the actual test of your monitoring, if you're prioritizing attacks and that sort of thing, man, you're never going to win that. You have to instrument, you have to do things from a professional transparency QA point of view. If you're not, you're never going to catch up. So I'm a big fan of CTEM, I'm a big fan of Scythe. And I just think as we professionalize this industry, we need to run IT the same way we run our nuclear power plants and the same way we run our air plants, with multiple controls and validations of that stuff. Now, just a couple more comments, and maybe we'll take some questions and whatnot. So I get a lot of questions about this administration and this focus on doing more offense. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I'm like, look, my first thing is, like, with all the amount of hacking that's going on, I can't see a solution where cyber offense is going to start a war. And that's usually a big example of that. Now, on the other hand, I'm not really saying we need to do commercial cyber offense either. There's a lot of issues with that. I will point out that the great people at Sophos had an operation called Pacific Rim, where they actually hacked all the way back to what I call like a Booz Allen of China, who was doing offensive cyber. And there really hasn't been any response from like the UK government, our government. I haven't seen any but public speakers, kind of criticize them or anything like that. And China didn't even talk about it, which is kind of interesting. And you could imagine in this Trump administration that maybe a cyber command that did more, bought more cyber weapons from the commercial sector, the same way we buy F-16s and F-18s. That might be an interesting thing. There might be more efficiencies there. It's certainly a strategy to consider. But the reality is that we really don't know how offense and intelligence collection works. There's a lot of people who are in that. They're certainly trying to share with the private sector. And, the main message from the offensive folks has been, look for lateral movement, right? Do your cyber hygiene. That's what interdicts for the most. But at the same time, and we've had Charlie Moore on our show. We've had Andy Boyd. Charlie Moore is deputy director at Cyber Command. Andy Boyd basically ran the CIA's offense. Look, offense always gets it, right? You can cheat. You can do supply chain attacks. You can plan. You have human intelligence. All these things that are out there. What are we supposed to take away as the private sector? Well, we really don't know, all of the techniques that are being done, and I'm not so sure that we should either. But at the same time, we are not set up as a country. When you look at the National Cybersecurity Strategy and you look at this whole nation kind of effort, we're really not set up to do that. So when you hear about this administration kind of going on the offense, there's also another parallel effort going on. There was another executive order that came out that said, look, the states are going to be more appropriate for handling cyber responses at the same level as like a national disaster or weather issues and things like that. I'm actually very happy with that kind of policy. Now, every state's different, but my main point here is this: if you're in cyber, and this goes back to the cyber professionalism, cyber is all about trust. Now, if you want to see if your water plant is secure, if you want to see if your local power is secure, you're just going to phone them up, right? You have to have some trust and some ability to do that. So one of the reasons we sort of moved away from our Gula Tech Foundation, just doing sort of like national, sort of philanthropy for cyber nonprofits, is to do a local cyber clinic that has local ties to the local government, to the local county, to the local nonprofits. And that type of trust is kind of what you need. It's a different thing than maybe a vendor trust or just being an expert or just saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But when I look at sort of how this administration is thinking about those kind of things, I think they want to rebalance and put more effort on the local governments to be involved in this problem. And we're not ready for this yet, right? We're not resourced for it yet. Most county governments, when I talk to a county government official, I'm like, hey, they can barely keep their own network secure, let alone respond to a community maybe the same way that they had to respond during COVID or a flood or something like that. But this is where I see our country going, right? If you really want to have a whole nation approach, it can't just be the vendors and the experts. It's got to be your local officials and stuff like that. Because a lot of those decisions that are being made at your county water treatment plants and your county hospitals and your county governments, your county school systems, they infect your community. And, this goes back to the cyber professionalization as well, as we can go ahead and do that. So I think in summary, look, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I think you're going to have a great conversation today with all the different speakers that are out there. But my main points are like, look, AI is coming. AI is going to start replacing people probably within 2 to 3 years. So if you're not already doing cybersecurity with AI, or at least looking at the AIs that are coming into your organization, you have to start doing that. Second thing is you've got to do things to professionalize our industry, right? You have to be visible. Cyber is not visible to people. The president's phone was hacked with one of the Salt Typhoon, perhaps, right? There wasn't a whole lot of outcry from that. I mean, all the routers are compromised, right? People don't see those kind of things, right? So you have to be that thing. As we professionalize cyber, call it data care, bring more people to our industry, but you have to be more professional when it comes around that. And the biggest thing you can do is be an advocacy of trust, right? You have to be able to show people, think about it like that Hippocratic Oath, right? Do care, don't do any harm, be confidential with the people you're helping with, and that sort of thing. And then the last thing is like, look, I mean, we got to watch what's going on with this administration. A lot of stuff's going to happen really, really fast. There's a lot of forces going on besides just what's going on out of the White House, right? Technology's moving on forward. We got a lot of different things going on with potential offense and defense out there. You are on the front lines of this fight, and you got to keep up with that. So, so basically with that, I'm going to try to take some questions, and some stuff was going on over here. What do we got as far as questions, Bryson?
Sure. So I'm going to address some of the things you said, because I also have a very offensive background. And we were talking about the hacking back, and you gave the example of where Sophos with Pacific Rim walked all the way back. And I think there's two aspects for why we didn't hear anything. The first is for the Chinese to say something means they acknowledge they were doing it. And the Chinese in particular don't like to acknowledge the operations they're doing, because getting caught is like saving face. So if I don't acknowledge it, then it didn't happen. The other thing is, for our perspective in the Western side, we're governed under a rule of law. And what's interesting about that is, in the rule of law in this case, it requires somebody to actually have been harmed for there to be a case. So if they don't acknowledge it and there's nobody taking you to court, then it's up to individual government decision to decide to do something about it. And strangely enough, nobody wants to do anything about those kinds of things. So we have an interesting kind of gray space where it tilts toward being allowed to do this. So I guess the question I would bring up, because this has been going around for years, is we had the letters of marque and we had the hacking back question. What do you think hacking back is something that we should look at doing, or should this just be the providence of of government, military, intelligence, and law enforcement?
Yeah, so a couple comments. So one, China might not disclose that they're hacking and acknowledge that, but they certainly put out papers, just like we put out threat intel papers on like the NSA equation groups and stuff like that. I was actually expecting them to do this for Sophos. Could you imagine if they came out like we got this actor called, we'll call it Sophon instead of not, right? And we tracked him here to their TTPs, that kind of thing. That's kind of what I was expecting. But of course, they're not going to come out. Look, I think what needs to happen with this country, and I've told this to a lot of people, but how does the private sector engage with CISA, NSA, Cyber Command, right? They literally get on Slacks, they get on Zooms, they get on calls, and they share intel, right? And there's this two-way communication. So the best way to hack back is to give back. Look, if you're in a spot and you can gather intel for the country, if you can gather intel for your company, gather intel for your customer, I'm all for that. Right now, does it mean you should be going all the way back? I mean, this is one of those things, just like paying ransomware. It's a lot of people pay ransomware. Are you funding the war in Russia with that? Man, that's a tough thing to say. But I do think we need to have more people aware that they are on the front lines of this fight, and that they may be in a situation to share with law enforcement and the intelligence community, and they should be encouraged to do so. This is one of the TTPs of I call it TTPs, but one of the ways I think the government could be better at basically saying, look, we're 9 steps ahead of the adversary. Sometimes the first time we hear about an adversary action is when, the CTO or the CEO of a company calls up and says, guess what? All of our stuff just went offline in this country. So we have to have that sort of the protections to enable those kind of communications.
So we've got a great question here. And I think you're uniquely positioned for this, because not only have you been executive management in your role as one of the key investors in the cybersecurity industry in the world, you talk with a lot of founders trying to solve problems, and you talk with a lot of the businesses who are trying to do this. And I think this is really, again, that macro perspective that is so valuable, because practitioners beat their heads against the wall, get frustrated, and blame their own management, right? Management doesn't get it. The company doesn't get it. They don't appreciate me. When really, it's like any other executive change project, right? We have to find a way to convince them. So what are your thoughts on how to do that?
Oh, it's funny. So I mentioned the YouTube channel with the animation a bunch of times. I'm working on a video where I've got the CISO in his office, and he's literally playing with the dolls. And it's the CEO talking to us. Oh, you're so good. You're doing a great job. Oh, I wish you told me that more, that kind of thing. And I think that's how a lot of CISOs feel. Like they just don't feel appreciated, when it comes to stuff like that. But look, the reality is this. HIPAA, many laws require you have to have a chief information security officer. You have to have certain things. So some companies are being dragged into doing these things. And if you're in an organization where you're being dragged in, you're probably under-resourced, underappreciated, undervalued, right? And that sucks. It does. The question is can you find a place where you are more valued? And I think we just look at this whole cyber place wrong. A lot of times we're trying to put these like cyber experts in businesses when we really need to make businesses just understand a little bit more about cyber. So the most effective thing I've seen with talking to the executives is these tabletop exercises. The more sort of tabletop exercises you can do where you've got other things than just a cyber attack, right? Business outages, lawsuits, that type of planning, I think is really, really useful for executive leadership. Because I got to tell you, look, I've met with so many CEOs and boards out there. Everybody thinks they're a great CEO and a great executive until they meet somebody who runs around them, right? I mean, I got a lot of criticism when I was running Tenable. I could have done this, could have done that. There's always somebody out there. The best CEOs are the ones who are transparent about their communication, open to feedback. But look, you might be working for a CEO who he or she might not want the feedback. They might not care about cyber, and that's just the way it is. As an industry, the more we professionalize things, the more we can. We can't shame them, but you got to have that interaction with them. You're muted.
Slightly related, but pulling out a flavor of that is the fact that so tabletops are a good way to educate. And part of executive engagement is getting them to shift to a proactive mindset, which is hard because we can't ignore the psychology. At the end of the day, executives are people. Users are people. You, the practitioners, are people, and people have a psychology, and that is motivated by fear. That is motivated by our understandings of risk. For those of you interested in learning a bit more about that, we've done some interviews here with Professor Mary Aiken and Dr. Stacy Thayer, where we looked at the psychology of attackers and defenders, which ties to some of that. But Ron, what other recommendations do you have for organizations to get out of the culture of putting out fires?
Yeah. So the problem with our industry is we talk about the entire industry. Like, what should the DoD do? What should Citibank do? All the way down to like, what should my dentist, office do? And it's really, really difficult, right? So I think a lot of people understand the cyber poverty line, that there's this imaginary level that you either the haves or the have-nots. I try to take what Wendy's done and talk about, if you're doing cyber hygiene and hunting, then you kind of know that someday the hygiene's not going to protect you and the hunting is going to help. But the reality is that, look, if you're in that construct, or you think your MSP is doing it, your MDR, your MSSP is doing it, but you really don't know. This gets back to what I was saying about it needs to be a professionalized industry, right? The same way we look at lawyers, the same way we look at finance, the same way we look at HR. We need to professionalize our industry and be professional about doing it, which means that, it's not, if you're putting out fires, you're not in a well-run, I would say, company. Now there's, are people in HR putting out fires? Yeah. People get DUIs, maybe you got to fire them. They do something wrong. There's things happening on all there, but they're designed to deal with those things. So trying to get organizations to understand that is a hard thing to do. There's a lot of other certifications that are going on out there. Like, you can get training for executives from like NACD, a couple other places. But the idea there is to really educate them about certain programs. Again, everything's different, right? If you're a executive at a bank, I throw out Citibank, JP Morgan, whatever, that's a lot more sophisticated. The question is, what are you doing if you're at a small community college? What are you doing if you're a small regional bank? It's interesting, but there's a lot of stuff out there, right? You got BENS, you got the business executives for national security, where you can meet with other people to talk about these risks and whatnot. There's a lot of different programs that are out there for this kind of leadership training and getting. You're going to have Phil on from IANS. I mean, that's another good resource for things like that. So it's trying to educate that the executives, that they are on the front line and they have a responsibility here. That's a tough one for them to think about.
So of course, more equals more vulnerability, more surface area, more code it always equals more vulnerability. So as we introduce advancements like artificial intelligence, what new vulnerabilities do these technologies introduce to cyber defense, and how can we proactively address them? Also, for everybody, we have Sunil Yu, who's going to be giving an entire talk on this question in half an hour as well.
Yeah. So on one hand, look, there's two arguments here. AI is just another app, right? And if you're lucky enough to have enough GPUs and you can run it locally, then it's just another local app, like a local database. And if you're using it in the cloud, then it's just another cloud app, right? Like Slack and Salesforce and that. Now, the other argument is that no, this AI is so transformative. This is sort of like the next level, up from the cloud, where the cloud allows you to do different things, the ephemeral nature of spinning up services and tearing things up and down as you need them based on demand and that sort of thing. And the ability to have a human intelligence sort of on demand like that is transformative. So look, on one hand, traditional cybersecurity rules apply, right? Access control, all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, we are seeing organizations, and this is where Sunil's going to go into it, but if you have all these disparate systems with all different access control, and you have this one giant AI that's going to talk to all of those different systems, now you almost need like an AI to translate. Can Ron even ask the question that he just asked the AI? Because this AI has access to everything. So, what does it really mean to have access to a database and that sort of thing? So it's going to introduce some complexity, but it's also going to simplify things. And if you look at some of the stuff I'm hearing about, where the phones are going to go away, the screens are going to go away, and you're just going to interact by speaking and listening to virtual assistants and things like that. Boy, that's a really different world, when right now we're talking about two-factor authentication and geofencing and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. I personally think the only new sort of vulnerability risk, if you're bringing an LLM into your organization and you can't look inside that LLM, that's just like bringing in a whole bunch of source code that's been compiled. How do you really know what's in there, right? You don't have the ability to kind of reverse engineer that. We've seen some tech in that space. I'd love to see more investment in that space and more research in that space. But for a lot of people who want to have their own local LLM, their own local AI models, boy, if they don't have the data that's training those things, it's kind of hard for them to say that this thing doesn't have a backdoor, doesn't have some bias that they're unaware of.
From an investor's perspective, which cybersecurity innovations or startups do you see as game changers for national defense, and why?
So, look, every one of the companies we invest in, and even these guys, right? I mean, there's a reason why I invested, and we could do that. So there's some of our portfolio companies are doing more interesting things for, I think, the defense of the country than others. One of them is Trinity Cyber. Now, their approach is deep pack inspection, full content inspection, and on one hand, when we were talking about what innovations have been out there, people have been doing this for a long time. I mean, I got started doing Dragon and looking at packets, and that industry really took off from intrusion detection to prevention. But what Trinity's doing at scale is protecting a lot of our warfighters, from having malware delivered to them, attacks delivered to them, and it's pretty good. We got another investment in a company called Second Front, and Second Front is solving a thing for the warfighter where this sounds, when I describe it this way, it's not as interesting. But if you want to take a commercial app and deliver it to an infantry person who's perhaps on the front lines in Europe next, or whatever's going to happen here, there's not a lot of incentive for commercial SaaS vendors to kind of run authority to operate, fully cleared type of stuff. And they've really made those things really, really interesting and easy for their customers. So those are the first two ones that kind of jump to mind, in particularly the Gula Tech portfolio. But I'll tell you, like, if you look at Huntress, we all know Kyle over there. Kyle's brought the fight. He used to be a TAO operator, but he's defending the country at the MSP level. So would you say Huntress is a national defense company? Absolutely not. Are they defending the homeland? Absolutely. And I think the vast majority of our portfolio CEOs feel that way. I know you do, Bryson.
Yeah, the way I talk about it is, what makes cybersecurity so unique is the fact that, there we go, you're moving the comment. National security is no longer an abstract thing. The United States has had the single best defense of any country in the history of all countries, with two large oceans, and then the North and South geography that has given us a very unique opportunity, privilege as a country to grow the way we have. And cybersecurity and the internet has changed that. And what we have now is you can have somebody with malicious intent and capability wake up in Beijing or Moscow and decide to do something. And what's so big about that, and I'm really glad that the US government changed its position about 2015, is turns out the number one economy that rests on digital data care, that soft underbelly is just as much of a national security component as anything else. And that's why we see the attacks on businesses. That's why we see the rise of ransomware that Chris Krebs and I announced back in 2020 at RSA, becoming the scourge of national security that it is. And what all of you see is that you are now on the front lines of your private industry being in that arena. And even worse than that, these folks don't discriminate. They go after our water utilities. They go after our schools. They go after our municipal governments. The basic building blocks of how we live our lives is under attack every single day. And so cybersecurity, not to get too carried away with it, is absolutely a national security thing, whether you have anything to do with any government at all or just private industry.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
From the perspective of a cybersecurity product and services architect, so for those you don't know, Ron does have a product background with Tenable. What approach would you take and what would you include if you were starting from scratch, now plugging into legacy security models?
Yeah, so look, if you're building a product, the big thing you have to decide is, are you going to have this product work on-prem or in the cloud? Now, when I started out, most security products were boxes, right? They were appliance that you could run, and then the cloud basically meant I could do a VM, virtual machine of that. But now I've got a lot of different companies who pitch us, and they're 100% Amazon, right? So they got Lambda, they got all these great security controls and that sort of thing, and they can't go on-prem, they can't go private, I can't run that Amazon tech on a Google Cloud. For a customer who wants to throw a lot of money at that, right? So portability and making those religious decisions up front about where you want your software to run is important. How you secure that is really, we've had so many advances in just how can we do secure, communication of agents, secure communicate. There's so many good things out there, so many good libraries out there. When you overlay this waterfall development and just constantly pushing out code with containers and whatnot, that's a different kind of thing. But that's something that can be done really well as well. But for the most part, my biggest thing for people who are running a startup, think about now where you want your code to run. Securing it is almost, I don't want to say it's an afterthought, because I'm preaching to the choir for this audience, because I still see a lot of insecure stuff. But I got to tell you, the last 4 or 5 companies we've invested in that I've done the deep dive security analysis of what's your architect. They're all fine. They're all fine. CrowdStrike here, Lambda. Make sure the admins can't get. People are doing the right things. I can't say that for the entire industry, but like I said, as a startup, the biggest thing is to think about where you want your code to run. And there's so many things that are going to be changing over the next couple of years. I'm doing a lot with animation these days and hosting. What NVIDIA with GeForce can do, what Zola can do, where you're getting on somebody else's desktop, man, it's going to transform the way we do remote web browsing and access to secure data, and even like video conferencing and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be a very interesting question for people, how they want to deliver their tech.
Okay, pivoting back to national security, there is a long-running desire on some parts to modify the various relevant titles. So for those of you who aren't aware, the titles listed here are how the U.S. government authorizes certain kinds of actions for military, intelligence, covert, and law enforcement. In some ways, it makes us more nimble. Yet in other ways, the limitations and separation increase our protection to ourselves. So we could probably also talk about the equities process with NSA that came out about a decade ago. Do you have a view on how increasing velocity of attacks and defense may make current legal restrictions or protections unviable?
Yeah, look, this is a byproduct of a free and open society where you have separate, government organizations doing things. I don't see that going away. And if you look at the 0 Day that was on Netflix, I'm not going to go to the punchline. I loved it, by the way. But what happened there is they created a special power where they suspended habeas corpus. They basically said, look, they didn't say it specifically like this, but the insinuation was, look, all these titles slow us down. So we're just going to give somebody God power to go hunt these hackers. And, and that's an interesting premise. I think there's a lot of, stuff we could unpack there. Is that really needed in real life? I don't think so. Right. Again, every deal's different. Every hack is different, right? Every threat is different. Sometimes you need to bring parts of the financial sector with the Secret Service. Sometimes you need to bring parts of, the DoD together with FBI. So everything's a little bit different. The more we can make it easier for people to work together and encourage them to work together to share. And I'm not just talking about like threat feeds and stuff like that. I'm literally talking about coordination and all that stuff. Look, there's a lot of groups out there that do this on a daily basis, but every week it's a different thing. We just got to encourage people to have the ability to do those things. I don't think it takes changing titles. We talked about maybe like these letters of marque. Maybe you deputize people that you actually can do all three of these titles like all at once. Now we kind of have a Judge Dredd, Cyber Judge Dredd, who can go out and do those kind of things. I'd be willing to experiment with it. I would. I think it's good to experiment with some of this stuff, but man, these separations of powers are there for a reason. And, it'd be interesting to see what happens. If you look at like the states, a lot of times, one of the things I like about America is like the states can experiment with how they want to do healthcare, how they want to do legal stuff like that. If you look at like the New York Cybercrime Task Force, Cyber Command in Texas has its own Cyber Command. Maybe at a state level, you can actually get some of this stuff done a little bit easier than you can at the federal level. Just something to kind of throw out and think about.
So one of the things that you represent a larger organization of Gula Tech, although it is you, again, you're one of the major investors in the world in cybersecurity. And so that's, again, this unique position of you deciding what's interesting, you seeing based on your discussions with all of these parts of industry all the time, beyond artificial intelligence, which we've already addressed. What do you think? What kinds of ideas would you invest in? Of course, you're not hooked to anything now, but I'm phrasing it that way. Just sort of, what do you think is next that's interesting? Because that's enough for you to put the money where the mouth is kind of idea. And indicates the kinds of problems and solutions that are next on the horizon.
Yeah, so a lot of what we do at Gula Tech is sort of like the next step after Tenable, right? So remember, we did Dragon, which was intrusion detection, detecting the hackers. Then we did Tenable, trying to find all the ways you can be hacked, and then Tenable didn't actually do patching or block firewall rules, right? Or it was pointing the problems out only. So if you look at everything we've invested in, you look at Trinity Cyber, right? Completely stops almost all the attacks, all the vulnerabilities being exploited on the known exploited vulnerabilities line. If you look at Automox, right? It's a great way to do enterprise, and small business patch management, right? You look at Huntress, you look at Inky. These are all different ways our companies are approaching different markets, bringing cybersecurity to these markets that didn't really exist. A lot of what I'm trying to do is move those things forward. And it's not just the vendors, right? When we were doing the nonprofits, we were trying to get them to up level as well. And like I said, so our focus right now is trying to make sure that we've got the right tech that can prevent attacks and get more people into the business. That's kind of what it says on the website, right? We try to invest in solutions that protect the nation's cyber defense, whether it's tech or more people like working with Cybrary or simulating the threats like Scythe. That's kind of where we're at. Now, we have done some national defense type stuff, which is good. I think it's important to have a role in that. But at the same time, we haven't gone all in with the AI stuff. Like we have a lot of companies that use AI. We have some that build their own LLMs, like Inky actually has their own LLM that does analysis of the emails and whatnot. But just the AI stuff's moving so fast. It's on one hand, we got a lot of great investments. On the other hand, I don't feel like we're missing out because the tech it's moving so fast, it's crazy. But this kind of gives you what we're looking at and stuff. I want to invest in stuff that does the secure enclaves. Any type of, we looked at companies that done like secure 5G, cryptographic networks, anything like that we like. And I've also said, look, anybody who can audit an LLM, I want to talk to. Like, I really want to be able to do more of the reverse engineering and find those kind of things. Those are the kind of things I'm looking for. And we've done a lot of public speaking on that stuff.
Prediction time, and since it's cybersecurity, that means the prediction is something bad. What is your guess for your forecast for something bad that you think will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's not going to be as bad as people think. I mean, we've had CrowdStrike taking out the stuff that were up and running the next day. We've had DNS issues that, it's always DNS, right? Sometimes BGP, but usually DNS, right? I just don't see a massive outage. And I'm not one of the, people who are just predicting that sort of thing. Are there going to be IT outages? Yeah, absolutely, right? Are there going to be things related to supply chain, things related to the lack of GPUs and stuff like that? Sure. But look, I mean, when I'm watching the Mike Tyson fight on Netflix and people are saying, oh, I got bad reception. Like, I don't know anybody who's got bad reception on that, right? So I think we're not going to see, I just don't see some sort of nationwide massive outage short of a war. And even during a war, I don't know why somebody would do that. I just don't see those kind of things. Plus, I'm more optimistic in that kind of stuff than I am.
Okay, so it's going to be more of the kinds of things that we've seen with minor to regional disruptions, which are challenges we have all the time anyway, with user error, configurations, things going down.
Right? I mean, Colonial Pipeline happened. People thought it was the end of the world. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And there's just so many other things that have gone. I mean, some boat gets stuck in the Suez Canal, and the price of eggs goes up, or whatever the right example is there. But my point is, I just don't think you're going to see a catastrophic. So going back to that 0-day thing on Netflix, all the phones were used to launch an attack. Okay, great. I don't think you're going to see that. Like, I don't think that would get by Apple or Google right now. No matter how good your offense is.
I think that's important because, again, I mean, going back to executive management, culture, leadership, engagement, change that we're trying to do. This is, again, the macro level and the micro level. We, in practitioners, are what are the best technical decisions of preventative and detective controls that we can put in place for our organizations. And then we all have a responsibility for this macro understanding. And a lot of what I've seen, of course, is the classic FUD, the fear and uncertainty and doubt, where I'm going to say it because I really hate it, is that there's going to be the digital Pearl Harbor, right? Where something so catastrophic happens that it's a new thing. And the problem with that is that that instills fear, but toward what? What action? What can we do with it other than we've increased the temperature in the room, gotten people freaking out? But how do we even harness that? And then again, to your point, well, maybe that's not even real.
Yeah. And you got to put those kind of attacks in context with like drones flying over New Jersey, where there's legitimate public concern over what are these things, or the floods that have happened, right? We seem to have weather events and that kind of stuff. When you put cyber next to all that stuff, it's probably where it needs to be. But I think these cyber attacks are going to be regional. At best, it's not going to be a massive nationwide outage.
Do you think that actually, because I mean, everything is eventually going to happen as technology progresses, interconnectedness progresses, military mission systems have, of course, become more interconnected. There's already been the reference back to war games in 1983, as there's been discussion around the use of artificial intelligence as a part of managing nuclear operations. What do you think that's going to look like when cyber? I mean, it's really the computerization, and then cybersecurity is the protection assurance of it. What do you think that's going to look like when we get there? And how far away do you think we are?
So look, I think within the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see organizations not replace people that retire, and they're gonna use virtual AI bots. You're gonna see that. You're absolutely gonna see that. I think the robots and the self-driving cars are gonna take longer, because when those things mess up, they kill people. And it's gonna, I mean, just look at what Wago and some of the guys have had issues with in Cal. The tech works, but look, it doesn't work. They can demonstrate a better efficacy than a human, but when a human screws up, it's a teaching moment, and there's some liability there. But when a car screws up or a robot screws up, it's got to be right so much more than a human. So I think it's going to take 5-10 years before you're going to see, if you have a plumber come to your house, where they bring up the plumbing robot. Right? I just don't see that happening. Now, can you get an HR AI assistant? Yeah, that's just being tested right now, and that's going to happen. So then, what is the future? Like, how far are you going? And it's like, as technology people, everything has always taken longer, right? Software takes longer to ship. Movies take longer to produce. Everything takes longer, except with AI. AI just seems to be going so much faster. So the question is like, when is that all gonna go? I'm a little influenced. There's some researchers who left OpenAI, and they put a paper out. They just kind of talked about what they think AGI is going to be here in 3 years. Look, the reality is the next few models are probably going to be on par with people. The question is then what's business's role to do that? Now, in a world, I need the movie voice, right? But in a world where you got robots and AI and that kind of stuff, the question, what's the cybersecurity? And this is where science fiction is just really prepared everybody. Everything from the Colossus, the Fortran project, all the way to things like Terminator, or books like Robopocalypse, where there's these AIs that do want to live on their own. Look, I don't think we know how these AIs work. I really don't think we know how to do that. And I think these next few models are going to be written by the AIs themselves and not by people. So it's going to get really, really crazy. It's going to almost become a religious system. And if you did see Colossus, the Fortran project, the next 2 books that they never made into movies, the people who take care of Colossus are basically the religious people who kind of deal with talking to the AI. That's a viable world. It's really crazy.
I think that is the perfect note to end on. So thank you so much. I hope you've seen all of the comments lighting up, enjoying, of course, the breadth of the conversation and all of the insights that you bring, Ron. And again, personally, thank you for all that you do for us and for the community.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I hope everybody enjoys the Unicon today. Happy Unicorn Day. And, maybe we should just stop all AI development right now and just be done. Right?
Yeah, thanks, Ron.
Right,
thanks
thank
for the insights.